Good morning, guys. I hope I'm audible. Okay. तो in our previous lecture क्या कवर किया था हमने? गजनविद इन्वेजन, घुरिद इन्वेजन से सब कवर हो गया था. We had ended with how Muhammad Ghori had left behind 3 governors and how they started fighting against each other as soon as he died, right? And finally, under Qutbuddin Aibak, a new sultanate was founded. Now we need to take a look at the consequences of Turkish invasion, long-term consequences. So we are going to look at the changes that were introduced due to the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. हम इनको अलग अलग हेड्स में कवर कर सकते हैं, इंक्लूडिंग political change, economic change, military change, and socio-cultural change. Right? Now, as far as political changes are concerned, first of all, we will look at how the political system was different in comparison to that during the Rajput period. And secondly, we are going to look at the evolution within the political system under the rule of different sultans. Okay? So, one major political change was the end of feudalism, which was a characteristic feature of the Rajput period. In its place, strong centralized command was introduced. Other important changes: divine rights of kings. देखो, a new institution was introduced in India known as the Sultan. Now, nominally, he was the supreme authority in all areas: judicial, legal, as well as administrative, executive, and military functions. However, he had to share power with some other centers, such as prominent military commanders, the upper crust of the society, that is the aristocracy, and the religious class of religious officials known as the ulema, right? And relations between these centers of power always remain tense. There was a constant tug of war between the Sultan and these other influential groups to maximize their own base of power, right? As a result, during the reign of some sultans, the level of centralization is going to be higher, and during the reign of other sultans, it is going to be much weaker. Okay? So this constant struggle for the balance of power became one of the defining features of the Sultanate period. Another important change, politically speaking, before the establishment of Turkish rule in North India, what did the political map of North India look like? Unity था या division था? Division, political fragmentation. Now that was replaced by political unity on a larger scale, right? The Turkish power in the north emerged as the most dominant power in the entire subcontinent. And natural tendency क्या होता है ऐसे powers का? To further expand themselves. So in different episodes during the Turkish rule, many incursions were made by the Turks from North India with Delhi as their base into other geographies of the subcontinent. At different points of time, different sultans even ventured into the south and even the deep south, bringing it under their either their direct or their indirect control. Okay? However, all these political institutions, practices, permutations and combinations, none of them received a sense of permanency. They were always in flux. So change was the only constant throughout the entire period of the Delhi Sultanate. Therefore, constant evolution of political, administrative and military practices and institutions was a salient feature of the political system of the Sultanate period. There was never a high degree of permanence. ठीक है, कोई strong sultans आते थे, they would assert their authority with despotic zest. However, during the reign of weaker sultans, the other centers of power would become much stronger. The territorial size of the empire would also shrink inwards, right? So ये सारे changes होते रहेंगे. Now, talking about this evolution of the political system, once again we can talk about different aspects. एक चीज हम बात कर सकते हैं about the position of the sultan, right? We can also talk about a new institution which had been introduced, the Ikta system, how that evolved under various sultans. We can talk about the organization of central administration under various sultans, the efforts made by Iltutmish followed by Balban, who introduced the portfolio system of administration. Further, we can talk about how new sultans introduced new departments in order to fulfill peculiar conditions that were rising within their period, within their rule. We can also talk about the revenue policy, the division of land in the reign of various sultans. So इन सब चीजों के बारे में हम बात कर सकते हैं. First of all, the position of the sultan. Now, in the traditional sense, the sultan was supposed to be the deputy of the caliph. So he enjoyed legitimacy, meaning that he had the right to rule in the eyes of Islam and the Islamic community. At the same time, traditionally speaking, in the traditional sense, the Sultan in his own sultanate enjoyed absolute power over all affairs, right? But this was the ideal case. In reality, क्या देखने के लिए मिलता था हमें? That the actual power of the Sultan varied under different sultans. The actual level of power that they could exercise was variable. And why was this? Because weaker sultans would have to enter into agreements with other powerful elements. कुछ लोग मिलिट्री का साथ ढूंढते थे, कुछ लोग अपने एथनिक ग्रुप को प्लीज करने की कोशिश करते थे, and some of them tried to please the ulama. And as a result, the other power centers always remained active. Okay? And since not even the strongest sultans could dismantle the other power centers, the sultanate lacked the permanence that was required for infinite and sustained political stability. Okay? And therefore, what are we going to see? Because of this, अगर stability नहीं होगा तो बार बार सुल्तान चेंज होगा या नहीं होगा? So we saw frequent revolts and coups. There were also several episodes of puppet sultans. Being controlled by kingmakers. ठीक है? And then finally, as opposed to the traditional Turkish model of the state, in which the Sultan, at least theoretically, was the supreme ruler in his kingdom, we also got to see certain episodes of Afghan rule in the Delhi Sultanate. So, Afghan theory of kingship was applied during the role of which dynasty of rulers? The Lodi rulers. Lodis were Afghans. Okay? Khiljis were also from Afghanistan, but they identified as Turks, and Khiljis are known for their despotism and imperialism. So Afghan theory of kingship was not adopted by them. Unique feature क्या होता है Afghan theory of kingship का? Afghanistan has majority tribal population, तो वहां पे political formations tribal lineages के ऊपर depend करते हैं, right? And for greater unity, one needs to make a contract with the important personality within each tribe. तो हर ट्राइबल चीफ्स के साथ, हर ट्राइबल सरदार के साथ कुछ ना कुछ समझौता करना पड़ेगा. The Sardar may accept your overlordship, but he is not going to accept your absolute rule. ठीक है? So as a result, within the Afghan theory of kingship, the Sultan was simply considered as the first among equals. Right? And since he was simply considered first among equals, level of centralization high होगा या level of decentralization high होगा? Decentralization would be high. Centralized authority of the Sultan would be quite limited in nature. However, while the founder of the Lodi dynasty had introduced the Afghan theory of kingship, कौन था founder of the Lodi dynasty? Bahlol Lodi. His son and successor, कौन? Sikandar Lodi, tried to dilute the Afghan theory of kingship. He once again tried to centralize power in his own hands. He was partially successful. Then his successor कौन था? Ibrahim Lodi continued the policy of centralization. However, he was a novice. नौ से क्या था? Very inexperienced. He could not navigate the troubled waters of maintaining imperial relations with high nobles, and therefore जो पुराने tensions थे between the Sultan and the nobility, जो अभी तक सिकंदर लोदी के रूल में suppress होकर के रह गए थे, they once again resurfaced. And because of this, what is going to happen? Internal unity or internal division? Internal division, right? So the Afghan model of kingship also came under the same stresses that the Turkish model of kingship had faced in the preceding period, right? And that was one of the reasons for the defeat of Ibrahim Lodi at the hands of Babur. So theoretically, the Sultan was first among equals, but once again, tensions persisted and there was no semblance of permanence. And when institutions are not permanent, can the superstructure that they are supporting survive? No, because institutions are the foundation of the administrative superstructure, and that is why we will see so many dynastic changes, so frequent revolts and rebellions, so many coups, so many puppet sultans being controlled by kingmakers, vulnerability to foreign incursions and invasions, inability to create a large permanent empire beyond the traditional boundaries of the empire. So these are going to be the weakness because of this impermanence. ठीक है, लिख लें इसको. तो give the heading political consequences. Political consequences. Write down. With the establishment of Turkish rule, comma, feudalism disappeared almost instantly. Feudalism disappeared almost instantly from North India. Almost instantly from North India. Full stop. The existing feudal lords were suppressed. इसी point में the existing feudal lords were suppressed. Comma, their powers were curtailed. Their powers were curtailed. and they were brought firmly under the authority and they were brought firmly under the authority of the Sultanate administration Subpoint. Therefore, the Sultanate period marks the revival of strong centralized rule in North India. Marks the revival of strong centralized rule in North India. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. हाँ, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. The political division of the Rajput period was replaced by political unity at a larger scale. Full stop. Subpoint. Initially, the whole of North India, from Punjab to Bengal, was brought under a unified administration. Next subpoint. Later, Turkish authority was also extended over South India. Turkish authority was also extended over South India. ठीक है. Next main point. The political institutions and administrative structures within the Sultanate were in a state of constant flux. Within the Sultanate were in a state of constant flux. Full stop. Subpoint. With the establishment of the Sultanate, new power centers had emerged. Including the office of the Sultan, the military, the aristocracy, and the ulema. Sultan, military, aristocracy, and the ulema. Full stop. Next subpoint. The balance of power between them Sub point. The balance of power between them could never be resolved permanently. तो कभी भी इक्विलिब्रियम नहीं एस्टैब्लिश हुआ, ठीक है. as such as such comma the structure and division of power within the Sultanate kept on evolving continuously. Kept on evolving continuously. Kept on evolving continuously. ठीक है. So these are the basic nature of the political changes. We can further analyze it by looking at individual heads such as the position of the Sultan. So give the next subheading, position of the Sultan. Position of the Sultan. Write down. The Turkish model of kingship was introduced with the establishment of Turkish rule. With the establishment of Turkish rule. Subpoint. Theoretically, the Sultan as the legal deputy of the Caliph enjoyed supreme authority in all matters of the state. In all matters of the state. Next subpoint. Essentially, he was an absolute ruler in whom supreme secular and religious powers were unified. Like the caliph उसका डेप्यूटी है, तो अपने सल्तनत में सुप्रीम रिलीजियस एज वेल एज सेक्युलर पावर्स को एक्सरसाइज करने का उसको थियोरेटिकली राइट था. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. However in reality, next main point. The level of royal absolutism was variable. Subpoint. Weaker sultans. Can you name one weak sultan? कोई स्ट्रॉन्ग सुल्तान जिसका नाम पता हो. अलाउद्दीन खिलजी और मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक, राइट। और वीक सुल्तान जो कि दूसरों पर डिपेंडेंट रहते हो, पॉलिसी ऑफ अपीजमेंट के लिए कौन सा सुल्तान जाना जाता है? फिरोज शाह तुगलक, राइट। फिरोज शाह तुगलक हो गया, नसीरुद्दीन महमूद हो गया, रुकनुद्दीन फिरोज हो गया, एटसेट्रा। Now they were never able to maximize central authority. They were not in a position to do so. क्या लिखा अभी आपने? Weak sultans such as नसीरुद्दीन महमूद और फिरोज शाह तुगलक depended upon the support of other powerful elements. Next sub point. On the other hand, strong sultans such as Alauddin Khilji or Muhammad bin Tughlaq exercised a high level of despotism. Full stop. Next sub point. However, the balance of power could never reach the stage of permanent equilibrium. Full stop. Next sub point. As a result, every sultan had to overcome subversive forces within the empire. Next sub point. This was one of the major factors behind the political instability within the Sultanate during all periods. Next sub point. It was this lack of permanence which was responsible for frequent rebellions and coups. COUPS and coups. Full stop. Next sub point. The political situation, sub point, next main point. The political situation was further complicated by the lack of, further complicated by the lack of any fixed rule of succession. Any fixed rule of succession. तो एक और permanent problem हो गया which would periodically raise its head. What was that? Bitter wars of succession, conflicts for the right to succeed, right? Resulting in, उसी में ही, resulting in frequent wars of succession. Frequent wars of succession. Next main point. The ethnic and factional divisions. The ethnic and factional divisions within the nobility led to further infighting, as ambitious nobles sought to place puppet rulers on the throne. Sought to place puppet rulers on the throne. Next sub point इसी में, as a result the mutual jealousies and intense competition within the nobility also hampered the prospects of political stability. ये पॉइंट समझ में आया है? तो होगा क्या कि one group of nobles are going to be successful in placing a weak sultan on the throne which they are concluding, and thus they are the de facto rulers. केवल नाम के लिए सुल्तान रूल कर रहा है, but this dominant group of nobles are not the only group, right? They have succeeded after competing against and defeating other factions of the nobility, other groups within the nobility. तो बाकी जो groups of nobility होंगे, are they going to be able to derive any benefits from the state structure? नहीं. So this is going to result in a feeling of relative deprivation. This is going to fuel jealousies and competitive feeling which already existed. So they are going to start conspiring not only against this puppet sultan but also against the other factions of the nobility. Okay? And this is going to be an ongoing constant process with no end, and that is why कभी भी permanence नहीं देखने के लिए मिलेगा. Next main point लिखो. In light of such internal stresses, comma, it is not surprising to note frequent dynastic change, frequent dynastic change, and almost constant threat of foreign invasions. Almost constant threat of foreign invasions. And this was one of the major reasons why, although the Sultan had the immense resources of the whole of North India at its disposal, it could not become a great power like the Turks of Central Asia, such as Amir Timur or Babur, etc. Okay? So they were able to transform their meager resources into a great power. इंडिया के सुल्तान्स हमेशा रीजनल पावर बन के रह गए. दे कुड नॉट एक्सपैंड देयर पावर फर्दर बियॉन्ड दिस, क्योंकि वहां पे कोई इंस्टीट्यूशनल परमानेंस नहीं डेवलप हो पाया. क्लियर? तो एक तो ये हमने देख लिया है पोजीशन ऑफ द सुल्तान में किस तरह से एवोल्यूशन हुआ. नेक्स्ट वी लुक एट दी इक्ता सिस्टम. क्या था ये इक्ता सिस्टम? हु इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इट? सबसे पहले अरबियों ने इंट्रोड्यूस किया था सिंध में, एंड आफ्टर द एस्टैब्लिशमेंट ऑफ द दिल्ली सल्तनत हु इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इट इन नॉर्थ इंडिया? विच सुल्तान? इल्तुतमिश, राइट. ठीक है. व्हाट वाज द इक्ता? लैंड ग्रांट्स था? नहीं, इट वाज नॉट लैंड ग्रांट. इट वाज सिंपली द असाइनमेंट ऑफ लैंड रेवेन्यू. ठीक है. तो लैंड ग्रांट का मतलब क्या होता है? ओनरशिप ऑफ द लैंड इज ट्रांसफर्ड टू द ग्रांटी, द पर्सन हु हैज बीन गिवन दैट लैंड. यहां पे ownership of the land has not been transferred. Simply the right to collect a revenue from a particular region has been transferred to an individual in return for something. तो क्यों दिया जाएगा ये? In return for what? For service. ठीक है. तो सिविल और मिलिट्री एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के लिए आपको लोगों को सैलरीज वगैरह देने होंगे. You can give them either cash salaries or you can pay them in kind. कि आपको एक parcel of land assign किया जा रहा है, you have the right to collect a revenue from this region. ठीक है. This is the Iqta system. It was introduced by the second Sultan, that is Iltutmish. Write down. The Iqta system was introduced by Iltutmish. Was introduced by Iltutmish. Full stop. Iqtas were land revenue assignments given to officials soldiers and noblemen in lieu of a cash salary. In lieu of a cash salary. ठीक है. Now tell me, are these land revenue assignments going to be permanent or temporary? टेम्पररी होंगे, आप किसी भी एम्प्लॉय को कब तक पे करते हो, जब तक वो आपको सर्व करता है, राइट। वंस द सर्विस स्टॉप्स द पेमेंट स्टॉप्स, दीज आर टेम्पररी। वर दे हेरिडिटरी और नॉन हेरिडिटरी? नॉन हेरिडिटरी, right? So since offices were non-hereditary, iktas would also be non-hereditary. अच्छा, was an iktadar given the same parcel of land as his ikta, or was the ikta frequently transferred? Frequently transfer किया जाएगा. Why? Because land is not simply a productive resource, it also is the basis for population, right? And अगर किसी भी ऑफिशियल के पास परमानेंट राइट है या फिर बहुत लंबे पीरियड तक राइट है एक एरिया को एडमिनिस्टर करने का, वहां के रेवेन्यू को कलेक्ट करने का, उस एरिया को डिफेंड करने का, so he has almost been given sovereign powers, right? And if the sultans were to make this arrangement permanent and not temporary, ये ट्रांसफर नहीं करेंगे, एक बंदे को एक ही जगह पे एकता दे दिया गया है, so the sultans are digging their own graves. What can the officials do in this case? They can cultivate their own influence in these local regions and then compete against the sultan, challenge the authority of the sultan. ये हमारा इलाका है, यहाँ पे सुल्तान नहीं आ सकता है, यहाँ का रेवेन्यू मेरा होने वाला है, ठीक है? That is what can be done by them. So that is why these iktas were transferable. Now, for introducing the ikta system, first of all, the categorization of agricultural land had to be done, ठीक है? So all the agricultural land, arable land, was divided into two categories. Khalisa and पैबाकी. खालिसा लैंड होता है crown land, right? So this is not land that is owned directly by the crown, but there is no division of revenue over here, ठीक है? That means all the revenue that is collected from this region, from the Khalisa land, that goes directly into the central treasury. तो ये सीधे सुल्तान के पास जाता है, ठीक है? तो there is no division of revenue over here. Paibaki land, on the other hand, is the land that has been set aside by the Sultan and his revenue officials to be divided among the various officials, soldiers, noblemen, commanders, etc. into iktas, ठीक है, as iktas. So land set aside for division as iktas, right? And what about the revenue generated from this parcel of land? तो उसका भी डिवीजन होगा, ठीक है? नाउ income from the ikta or revenue from the ikta was supposed to provide for several fields of expenditure, such as salary of the iktadar, right? The person, the official who has actually been granted this land revenue assignment. The Iqtadar was also responsible for local administration, including maintenance of law and order, collection of revenue, defense, right? And Iqtadars were also supposed to maintain overall security of this area by maintaining a body of troops, by garrisoning them, by building and repairing forts, by purchasing and feeding animals used for the armed forces, by purchasing equipment, by manufacturing equipment, etc. Right? So the Iqtadars were also supposed to undertake some degree of military expenditure. Okay? Now, the revenue that is collected from Iqtas was generally greater than the sum of all of these. तो सैलरी मिला लीजिए, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव एक्सपेंडिचर मिला लीजिए, मिलिट्री एक्सपेंडिचर मिला दीजिए, उसके बाद भी इस इनकम का कुछ पोर्शन बच जाता था. ठीक है? एंड दिस पोर्शन और द revenue surplus from the Iqta was known by the name Fawazil. अब ये बताओ फवाजिल के ऊपर किसका हक होना चाहिए, जो लोकल इक्तादार है या फिर सेंटर का? सेंटर का. व्हाई? बिकॉज इक्तादार इज नॉट द लैंड ओनर, ही हैज सिंपली बीन असाइंड अ पीस ऑफ लैंड over which he has been given revenue collection rights, from which he could pay himself, look after local administration and defense. जो भी remaining amount है, that was known as fawazil, that theoretically belonged to the sultan. I am using the word theoretically over here. हमेशा टेंडेंसी क्या होगा जो भी लोकल ऑफिशियल्स हैं कि फवाजिल को ज्यादा डिक्लेयर करें या कम डिक्लेयर करें? कम से कम डिक्लेयर करें. बोले कि साहब सारा का सारा पैसा तो यहीं पे खर्च हो गया, हमको तो और पैसा चाहिए था, हम मांग नहीं रहे हैं, आप पे मेहरबानी कर रहे हैं. राइट? तो दिस वाज द natural tendency of the local officials to maximize expenditure and minimize the level of fawazil. तो वीक सुल्तान्स के पीरियड में क्या होगा? Is a fawazil going to flow reliably to the center or is it going to remain localized? Localized revenue decentralization होगा. और स्ट्रॉन्ग सुल्तान्स क्या करेंगे? Revenue centralization. They are going to emphasize upon the remission of fawazil to the imperial treasury in a reliable manner, accurate manner. The most ambitious sultans, what are they going to do? They are going to bring about changes in the revenue administration at the local levels. For example, some division of power, separation of powers is going to be created. कि जो ये इक्तादार्स हैं इनसे इनकी रेवेन्यू पावर्स कुछ लोग छीन लेंगे, या फिर इनके ऊपर सर्वेयर्स बिठा देंगे, or maybe some controller of accounts who could maintain proper records and give an accurate report to the center, right? So that इस तरह का cheating ना हो पाए. ठीक है? However, this arrangement was also never permanent. जैसा हमने देखा दिल्ली सल्तनत में शुरू में ही कि always there was impermanence. So it would depend on the personality of the sultan and his ability to project power कि ये जो सिस्टम है एकता का किस तरह से फंक्शन कर रहा है. ठीक है? And this impermanence is also going to be reflected in the nature of the iktas. Now, theoretically speaking, iktas were non-hereditary, non-transferable, and these iktadars were frequently transferred from one place to the other, right? अब weak sultans के period में क्या होगा? That many of the iktas were made permanent. That large number of iktadars were declared to be hereditary nobles, that they could not be transferred from one place to the other. that a number of tax exemptions were also given to them. ठीक है, so under weaker sultans, the Ikta system, instead of remaining an instrument of centralization, became highly decentralized. ठीक है, now any political structure is built upon a series, a framework of compromises, क्योंकि कई लोगों का उसमें साथ चाहिए होता है, कोऑपरेशन चाहिए होता है, and their cooperation loyalty needs to be rewarded by the person who is at the top. उस समय मेन सोर्स ऑफ इनकम क्या होता था? Agricultural revenue. That is why land was the most valuable resource. As such, Iltutmish had introduced the practice of making some tax-free land grants as well to certain individuals and institutions. These land grants fell under different categories. They were known as milk grants, Waqf grant, Inam grants, and Idrar grants. Milk grants were hereditary grants given to certain individuals, especially scholars. Waqf was land donated by the center to religious institutions, madrasas, mosques, etc. Inam was a hereditary grant given to an official, especially a notable commander. And Idrar was a charitable grant made towards the upkeep of the common populace, especially in times of crises. Okay? Now, as far as the sultans felt the need to keep maintaining these land grants, ये रहेंगे existence में. But if an extremely strong sultan emerged who did not feel the need to appease these all different sections of the population who had other objectives, वो क्या करेगा? इनको abolish कर देगा, जो tax exemptions हैं उनको हटा देगा, etc. And this was done by Alauddin Khilji. So once again, within the Ekta system, within the division of land, there is going to be constant evolution. अभी आपने last क्या लिखा था? What was the last point that you had written? नहीं नहीं नहीं, जब dictate करवाया था. In lieu of a cash salary, ये लिखवाया था. Next point लिखो. Initially, these assignments were temporary, non-hereditary, and non-transferable. नॉन ट्रांसफरेबल का मतलब कि ये लैंड को जो भी इक्तादार है वो बेच नहीं सकता है, ठीक है. एंड नॉन ट्रांसफरेबल. फुल स्टॉप. सेम पॉइंट में कंटिन्यू. द इक्तादार्स वर आल्सो फ्रीक्वेंटली ट्रांसफर्ड. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. हाँ, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. The duties of the Iqtadar included A, B, C. A, revenue collection. B, maintaining law and order. C, maintaining a military presence. D, general administration. Next point, next main point. The agricultural land within the empire was divided into the agricultural land within the empire was divided into Khalisa land, within brackets Crown's land, and Pebaki land. Within brackets set aside for distribution as iktas. Distribution as iktas. Next main point. Income generated from the iktas was supposed to provide for A, salary of the iktadar. B, local administrative expenditure. And C, military expenditure. Local administrative expenditure and C, military expenditure. Next sub point. The revenue surplus known as Pawazil was supposed to be remitted to the imperial treasury. Full stop. Next main point. Apart from their income from the iktas, the iktadars also enjoyed tax exemptions on their own property. These iktadars were quite wealthy, right? So they also owned a lot of agricultural land in their own capacity, but unlike the regular farmers, they were not expected to pay any tax, right? They also enjoyed tax exemptions. Next main point likho. Additionally, The sultans also made a number of tax-free land grants from their Khalisa lands. These included ये चार लिख लो, ABCD, milk, waqf, inam and idrar. Milk was a hereditary grant given to scholars and priests. Waqf, a gift of land to religious institutions. Inam, a land grant, a hereditary land grant rewarding loyal service. और idrar, hereditary land grant rewarding loyal service. और idrar, land donated as an act of charity. Land donated as an act of charity. हाँ, मिल्क का हेरिडिटरी ग्रांट गिवन टू स्कॉलर्स और द प्रीस्टली क्लास. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. हाँ, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. Like all other institutions, comma, the ICTA system also evolved. The ICTA system also evolved with time. तो चार सुल्तान्स के एफर्ट्स हम लोग देखने वाले हैं. चेंजेस दे इंट्रोड्यूस्ड. इल्तुतमिश, बलबन, अलाउद्दीन खिलजी एंड मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक. ठीक है. और सॉरी 5, फिरोज शाह तुगलक ऑल्सो. नेक्स्ट लिखो. इसी में सब पॉइंट. इल्तुतमिश, he introduced the ICTA system. And Iqtadars enjoyed a high degree of privileges such as tax exemptions. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट, बलबन. He introduced a new official known as Khwaja to supervise the revenue accounts. Of each iqtadar. नेक्स्ट, अलाउद्दीन खिलजी, इसने क्या किया? He abolished all the tax-free land grants and also abolished the tax exemptions enjoyed by the Iqtadars. ठीक है, write down. He abolished all tax-free grants and exemptions. All tax-free grants and exemptions. फिर अलाउद्दीन खिलजी के बाद कौन सा डायनेस्टी आया? तुगलक डायनेस्टी. अब तुगलक डायनेस्टी में सबसे पहला रूलर कौन था? गियासुद्दीन तुगलक. So he undid all the changes that Alauddin Khilji had introduced. However, after him, Muhammad bin Tughlaq reintroduced all the changes that he had introduced. Next लिखो Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He also removed all tax exemptions enjoyed by Iqtadars. All tax exemptions enjoyed by Iqtadars. And finally, next, Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Firoz Shah Tughlaq is known for his policy of appeasement. So he is going to try to appease each and every quarter of the population. And in this pursuit of appeasement, he is going to reintroduce all the privileges enjoyed by the Iqtadars, and he is going to go one step further. Iqtas were made hereditary in nature. Okay? Write down Firoz Shah Tughlaq. He reintroduced the traditional privileges of the Iqtadars, and Iqtas, traditional privileges of the Iqtadars, and Iqtas became hereditary. Became hereditary. ठीक है? Is this much clear? तो ये तो हो गया इक्ता सिस्टम और उसका एवोल्यूशन. नेक्स्ट, सेंट्रल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. राइट, यहाँ पे क्या देखना है हमें कि हाउ द सेंट्रल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ऑफ द सल्तनत वाज ऑर्गेनाइज्ड. तो सेंट्रल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में कई सारे एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव पावर्स हैं, उनका डिवीजन किस बेसिस पे किया जा रहा है? व्हाट आर द इंस्टीट्यूशंस दैट हैव बीन क्रिएटेड? डू दीज इंस्टीट्यूशंस एंजॉय अ डिग्री ऑफ परमानेंस या फिर ये भी इम्परमानेंट है? राइट, दैट इज व्हाट वी नीड टू सी. नाउ the initial beginning of giving some administrative stability was undertaken under Iltutmish. ठीक है? When Iltutmish assumed the throne, assumed the crown, there were a lot of problems that he was facing. Therefore, he needed a group of reliable officers, a group of capable officers who would remain loyal to him in order to distribute some important powers. He would give each and every individual some amount of authority and a great degree of discretion. And since they were loyal to him, they are always going to look after his interests, right? And this arrangement was known as the तुर्काने चिहलगानी Balban also refers, Barni also refers to it as the Chalisa. Some English historians referred to this as the group of 40. क्या था ये? This was the entourage of Turkish slave officials who were associated with Iltutmish, to whom he gave important positions, gave a lot of responsibility, gave a lot of power, right? However, it was an ad hoc arrangement. क्यों ad hoc arrangement बोल रहे हैं हम इसको? Because this system relied upon individuals for carrying out the administrative functions of the state rather than institutions. So it was personality based, right? Now this system is going to function well only till the time that Iltutmish remained on the scene. As soon as Iltutmish died, all his slaves were freed and they now veritably controlled different sections of imperial power, of royal authority. And are these individuals going to voluntarily give up their power? नहीं, they are in fact going to try to seize even more power. इसकी वजह से नुकसान किसका होगा? The next sultan is going to face a number of problems, right? And this resulted in you can say tensions within the central administration after Iltutmish. So it functioned admirably during the reign of Iltutmish, but after that it was counterproductive. Therefore, it needed to be removed and replaced with an institutional administrative mechanism. क्योंकि उसके पास पोर्टफोलियो सिस्टम ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन इंट्रोड्यूस करने के लिए अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं थी. The empire was facing a threat from all sides. Internally कई सारे rebellions चल रहे थे, externally west पे भी threat था, east पे भी threat था, Bengal had broken away, right? And Tajuddin Yildiz, Nasruddin Kubacha, they were all also conspiring against Iltutmish. Further, Rajput states had also rebelled. That is why an ad hoc mechanism, an emergency mechanism was put into place. Iltutmish devolved a number of administrative responsibilities to his most trusted and capable slave officials. And after that, जब stability आया भी, तब भी इसको change नहीं किया गया, because हर एक mechanism का अपना एक inertia होता है. Once people get habituated to a particular reality, they tend not to disturb it. तो उसको करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं थी, because Iltutmish also realized that if he was to suddenly introduce a portfolio system of administration in which he would be required to dismiss many of these slave officials from their positions of prominent power, then resentment would be there. Iltutmish did not want to take on that burden. That is why he remained with the Chalisa system, Turkane Chilwani only. Next change was brought under Balban, and he introduced the Diwan system or the portfolio system of administration, in which a central administration was divided among various departments. For each and every subject of administration, a separate department was created, where the authority was clearly defined, where the ranks of the various officials was put in place, their individual responsibilities, a chain of command was established, salaries were fixed, सब कुछ किया गया जैसे डिपार्टमेंट फंक्शन करता है, right? And within this Diwan system of administration, Balban introduced how many departments? 4 departments, which served as the administrative backbone of the Sultanate from the beginning to the very end. तो आगे जाकर के कई सारे और डिपार्टमेंट्स इंट्रोड्यूस होंगे, बट दीज आर गोइंग टू बी दी 4 मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट वंस. कौन कौन से हैं ये? दीवाने विजारत, दीवाने अर्ज, दीवाने रसालत एंड दीवाने इंशा, राइट? दीवाने विजारत वाज दी रेवेन्यू डिपार्टमेंट, दीवाने अर्ज वाज दी military department, Diwane Rasalat was the judicial department, it was also the department for foreign correspondence. Judicial, ecclesiastical and external affairs department. क्योंकि जुडिशियल ड्यूटीज वर पार्ट एंड पार्सल ऑफ द रिलीजियस क्लास ऑफ ऑफिशियल. शरिया लॉ इंट्रोड्यूस हो चुका था, जो रिलीजियस स्कॉलर्स थे वही काजीज होते थे, एंड दे फंक्शन अंडर द विद इन द उलेमा, अंडर द इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ द उलेमा. एंड दीवाने इंशा वाज द डिपार्टमेंट फॉर रॉयल कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस. तो एवरी ऑर्डर दैट इज इशूड बाय द एम्परर, बाय द सुल्तान, दैट वुड नीड टू बी रिकॉर्डेड. उसकी कॉपीज बनाई जाएंगी, उनको अप्रोप्रिएट जगहों पे भेजा जाएगा, वहां पे कॉपीज बनेंगी, रिस्पॉन्सेज का रिकॉर्ड रखा जाएगा, फिर उसके ऊपर फर्दर कुछ अगर डिस्कशंस हुए हैं तो उनके मिनट्स बना के रखे जाएंगे. दीज काइंड्स ऑफ थिंग्स वाज डन बाय द दीवाने इंशा. दिस वाज द डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ रॉयल कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस. राइट? तो बलबन ने ये 4 डिपार्टमेंट्स इंट्रोड्यूस किए. एंड व्हाट डिड ही डू टू द तुर्काने चिहलगानी? तुर्काने चिहलगानी was dismantled. Many of the old Turkish nobles, they were put in prison, many were even assassinated. कुछ को legal trial के बाद execute किया गया, कुछ को exile किया गया, right? And thus the Turkane Chihelgani first had to be dismantled, and only after that the Diwan system could come into force. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेजर चेंज आएगा अंडर अलाउद्दीन खिलजी. He introduced 2 departments, दीवाने रियासत एंड दीवाने मुस्तखराज. दीवाने रियासत was introduced to oversee his market reforms. तो मार्केट रिफॉर्म्स इसने प्राइस कंट्रोल्स इंट्रोड्यूस किए थे, तो उसको ट्रांसमिशन उस पॉलिसी को ट्रांसमिट करने के लिए दीवाने रियासत वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड. दिस वाज the department responsible for the regulation and overseeing of markets. And दीवाने मुस्तखराज, इसने जो इक्तादार थे उनके टैक्स एग्जेम्पशंस खत्म कर दिए थे, एंड दीवाने मुस्तखराज उसको ये जॉब दिया गया था कि इन लोगों से जिन्होंने कई सालों तक टैक्स एग्जेम्पशंस एंजॉय किए हैं, they should be forced to pay tax not from only this year going forward but retrospectively also ever since Alauddin became the sultan. तो उसने पूरे पीरियड के लिए टैक्सेस कलेक्ट करना शुरू किया from those people who had enjoyed exemptions, and for that the Diwane Mustakharaj was introduced. So this was the department of retrospective taxation. Then we have Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He introduced one department known as the Diwane Amir Kohi, also sometimes known as the Diwane Kohi. क्या होता है ये? This was the new department of agriculture introduced by him. So he had introduced a new system of taxation, new policy of taxation, and also some agricultural reforms. So उन reforms को oversee करने के लिए this new department Diwane Amir Kohi was introduced. And finally we have Firoz Shah Tughlaq. He introduced 3 new departments. दीवाने खैरात, दीवाने इश्तियाक, and the दीवाने बंदागन. दीवाने खैरात was the new department for making charitable endowments. नया charity department था. It usually gave cash endowments to poor Muslim families who wanted to marry off their daughters. तो शादी का खर्चा स्टेट उठाने लग गया. दीवाने इश्तियाक was another department which was supposed to look after relief and rehabilitation efforts for those people, for those individuals, especially nobility and ulemas who had suffered during the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. तो मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक ने कई सारे उलेमाज की प्रॉपर्टी को अटैच कर लिया था, कई सारे नोबल्स के टैक्स एग्जेम्पशंस को खत्म कर दिया था, उनकी प्रॉपर्टी को कन्फिस्केट कर लिया था. तो दे हैड टू बी प्रोवाइडेड रिलीफ. सो इट वाज द department for providing relief and rehabilitation. And Diwane Bandagan, this was the department for overseeing the welfare of slaves. Now, during the reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, the state had emerged as a big slave owner. A large number of slaves were being maintained by the state for both personal service to the Sultan and also for working as skilled and unskilled workers in the fields, in the karkhanas, etc. And Firoz Shah Tughlaq personally owned more than 1.5 lakh slaves. So you can imagine the kind of influence that they may have exercised at the court, क्योंकि ये खुद ही बहुत बड़ा pressure group, influence group बन चुके थे. So they also needed to be looked after. For क्या क्या हाँ, सुल्तान दिलवाता था कारखानाज में. हम लोग कारखानाज के बारे में आगे जाके पढ़ेंगे. we'll also be comparing these कारखानाज to the मुगल कारखानाज. तो उन कारखानाज में रॉयल एक रॉयल ऑफिशियल होता था, यूजुअली अ नोबल. ही यूज्ड टू ओवरसी दीज कारखानास। स्टेट यहाँ पे जो भी रॉ मटेरियल के लिए पैसा चाहिए वो प्रोवाइड करवाता था, जितना भी मशीनरी चाहिए, फ्यूल चाहिए वो प्रोवाइड करवाता था। majority चीजें स्टेट खुद अक्वायर कर लेता था। तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल गिफ्ट गिविंग वॉज अ बिग ट्रेडिशन एट द रॉयल कोर्ट। नोबल्स को भी बहुत सारे गिफ्ट चाहिए होते थे और सुल्तान को भी बहुत सारे गिफ्ट चाहिए होते थे। गिफ्ट्स एक्सचेंज करके ये एक दूसरे को अपनी गुडविल शोकेस करते थे। और गिफ्ट्स किस तरह के एक्सचेंज करेंगे उस हाई लेवल पर? ऑर्डिनरी गुड्स और लग्जरी गुड्स। लग्जरी गुड्स, अब उसमें सिल्क चाहिए होगा, गोल्ड चाहिए होगा, सिल्वर चाहिए होगा, सम ज्वेल्स चाहिए होंगे, तो वो सब कहाँ पे बनाया जाएगा, कहाँ पे तराशा जाएगा? इन दीज रॉयल कारखानाज ओनली। बोथ नोबल्स एज वेल एज द सुल्तान वर मेन कस्टमर्स ऑफ दीज कारखानाज, राइट? तो आगे जाकर के हम इनके बारे में देखेंगे। तो इनफैक्ट वहां पे जो स्किल का इम्पार्टेशन था that used to take place through the उस्ताद शागिर्द ट्रेडिशन। तो एक मास्टर होता था उसमें, he was the expert in a particular field. He used to take on a number of slaves as his apprentices, अपने चेले बना करके, right? Once they became masterful themselves, they were now transferred to other locations. कोई दूसरे कारखाने में they would become the masters. तो इस तरह से स्किल्स का डेवल्यूशन होता रहा यहां पर, ठीक है? तो ये हो गया सेंट्रलाइज्ड एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन। नेक्स्ट, प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन। नाउ प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन और सब प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में द इक्ता सिस्टम इटसेल्फ वाज सर्विंग एज अ यूनिट ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन। तो some of the iktas were larger in size, some of the iktas were smaller in size. जो largest iktas होते थे they were known as विलायत्स और मुक्तईज, ठीक है? And within the administrative system they functioned as provinces. They were headed by an official known either as a wali or a mukti, who apart from being the local iqtadar also served as the provincial governor. And his duties included क्या क्या चीजें? जनरल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, मेंटेनिंग ऑफ लॉ एंड ऑर्डर एंड डिफेंस, रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन, ये सारी ड्यूटीज ये एंजॉय करता था, ठीक है? राइट। नाउ each vilayat was divided into a smaller unit of administration known as a sheikh, which was analogous to the modern district. And over here क्या पावर्स होते थे? सॉरी, कौन से ऑफिशियल होता था? शिकदार। And the shikdar also enjoyed the same powers at as the wali or mukti, but at the level of the sheikh. So he was responsible for revenue administration, general administration, maintenance of law and order, as well as defense, military, ठीक है? The sheikh was further subdivided into parganas, but these parganas were not administrative units. क्या थे ये? They were revenue units which served as subdivisions of the district, right? So these were sub-district revenue circles, right? और जो यहाँ पे ऑफिशियल होगा, is he also going to be an general administrator or only a revenue administrator? रेवेन्यू एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर, और रेवेन्यू एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर में भी केवल रेवेन्यू कलेक्टर होता था ये, ठीक है, नोन एज द अमील. He was the revenue collector. And each pargana was made of a number of villages or gaon. This was the lowest unit of administration, and इस लेवल पर there was no official appointed directly by the Sultan. Rather, at the village level, there were local officials who were appointed locally. These were known as khut or muqaddam. The khut or muqaddam was the local village headman. The Hindu village headmen were known as khuts. Muslim village headmen were known as muqaddams. Another term for them was chaudhry. कुछ रीजन्स में इनको चौधरी भी बोला जाता था. हाँ, खुद को मुकद्दम को दोनों को चौधरी भी बोला जाता था. ठीक है. What will be the kinds of powers that they enjoy? रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन का पावर इनके पास होता था, और लोकल जुडिशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का पावर, लोकल केसेस को डिस्पोज करने का पावर इनके पास होता था, पुलिसिंग पावर्स इनके पास होता था, एंड लोकल डिफेंस का भी पावर इनके पास होता था. ठीक है. तो दे आर ऑल्सो गोइंग टू एंजॉय रफली द सेम काइंड्स ऑफ पावर्स एंजॉयड बाय द हायर लेवल ऑफ सल्तनत ऑफिशियल्स एट द प्रोविंशियल लेवल. राइट. नाउ अपार्ट फ्रॉम द विलेज हेडमैन, there was also another local official who was essential for the smooth functioning of revenue administration at this level, and he was known as the patwari. patwari कौन होता था? He was the village accountant. So, as the village accountant, he used to maintain records of not only land ownership but also the amount of revenue submitted by each and every individual. ठीक है. तो लैंड रिकॉर्ड्स और रेवेन्यू अकाउंट्स को ये मेंटेन करता था. इज दिस क्लियर? तो what do we see in provincial administration? Do we see the concentration of powers or separation of powers? Separation of powers देखा है हमने. Concentration of powers was the norm at each and every level, including the provincial level, the sub-provincial level and the village level. The same official is responsible for different administrative functions. अब ये वली जो है, he is the chief judicial officer also, he is the chief executive officer also, chief legislative official and the chief military official at the provincial level. So concentration of power was the norm. ठीक है, ये टेबल बना लिया ना आप लोगों ने? आगे लिखो एक पॉइंट, concentration of power was the norm of Sultanate provincial administration, And what was the result of this inordinate amount of concentration of powers? Yes. Write down sub point. As a result, comma, the provincial governors enjoyed a high degree of autonomy. Next sub point. During the reigns of weak sultans, they tended to do what? Gravitate towards the center or get even more distant हो जाएंगे, right? They tended to break away from central authority. ठीक है, next main point. As such, comma, the provincial nobility always remained a threat to the sultan's authority. Further complicating the balance of power. ठीक है, in fact the provincial nobility was responsible for the downfall of many sultans. Can you name some? सेंट्रल नोबिलिटी तो को किसी तरह से कुछ सुल्तान्स कंट्रोल तो कर लेते थे, बट प्रोविंशियल नोबिलिटी को कई सारे सुल्तान्स नहीं फेस कर पाए. सबसे पहले रजिया सुल्ताना, देन अलाउद्दीन खिलजी नहीं, बलबन. ठीक है, तो आफ्टर हिज डेथ हिज सक्सेसर्स वर ओवरथ्रोन बाय अ प्रोविंशियल कमांडर, राइट, जलालुद्दीन खिलजी. अच्छा, फिर उसके बाद दी तुगलक्स, राइट, तुगलक्स किसने रिप्लेस किया? सैयद्स ने, हुवर दी गवर्नर्स ऑफ पंजाब. इवन दी सैयद्स they were replaced by the lodhis who were also governors of Punjab only, right? And lodhis themselves were undone due to the treachery of provincial nobles, once again the governors of Punjab. So although they were members of his own family members ने ही betray किया था, लेकिन थे तो सब provincial governors ही ना, so they always remained a big challenge for the sultans to control. ठीक है, तो ये हमने देख लिया है political changes और polity में evolution. Next, what do we have to see? The military consequences. Can you recall the nature of the Rajput military? किस तरह का होता था? सेंट्रलाइज मिलिट्री विद यूनिफाइड कमांड होता था या फ्यूडल मिलिट्री विद ब्रोकन कमांड, फ्रैगमेंटेड कमांड? फ्यूडल मिलिट्री विद फ्रैगमेंटेड कमांड, राइट. टर्क्स का मिलिट्री सेंट्रलाइज्ड, राइट. सो राइट डाउन. The Rajput feudal military system was gradually replaced by a strong centralized military with unified command. And towards the creation of this strong centralized military, many sultans made contributions, beginning with Iltutmish. It was Iltutmish who laid the seeds of a strong centralized military. He did not introduce a full-fledged centralized military, but he did introduce two body of troops, one known as the Sar-e-Jahandar and the other known as the Hashm-e-Kalb. Write down. Iltutmish introduced two bodies of troops which formed the core core of the future standing army. A and B. A, Sar-e-Jahandar. क्या था ये? This was the royal bodyguard which always accompanied the sultan wherever he went. ठीक है? And second was Hashm-e-Kalb. This was the mounted cavalry. So an elite corps of the cavalry where horses were maintained by the state, the soldiers were paid directly by the sultan. ठीक है? Next point, write down. Apart from this, next main point, apart from this, Iltutmish also began the practice of paying soldiers in which form? Through cash salaries or iktas? Through iktas. Paying soldiers through iktas. So he began assigning iktas to soldiers. क्लियर है? Next major change is going to be introduced by Ghiyasuddin Balban. So he built upon the foundation that was set by Iltutmish, and he was the one who introduced a full-fledged standing army. Right? Write down. Balban introduced a full-fledged standing army. और इस full-fledged standing army को administer करने के लिए a new military department was also established. Write down. Further, he introduced the Diwan-e-Arz to administer the large army. The military department was headed by an official known as the Ariz-e-Mumalik. Known as the Ariz-e-Mumalik. But the Sultan remained the supreme commander. Remained the supreme commander of the entire military. Of the entire military. It was under Balban, next point, it was under Balban that the concept of operational security was introduced. ऑपरेशनल सिक्योरिटी किस चीज को बोलते हैं? मेंटेनिंग सीक्रेसी ऑफ मिलिट्री प्लानिंग एंड ऑपरेशंस. तो किस जगह पे अटैक करना है, कहाँ कौन कौन जाएगा अटैक करने, कौन से यूनिट्स वहां पे डिप्लॉय किए जाएंगे, उनको सामान कैसे पहुंचाया जाएगा, किस समय अटैक होगा, ये सारी चीजें बहुत सेंसिटिव होती हैं. एंड इसको अगर नोइंगली या अननोइंगली कोई डाइवर्ज कर देता है तो दैट कैन कॉज अ बिग लॉस. एंड बल्बन ने क्या किया? ही मेड द डाइवर्जिंग of military secrets a capital offense. तो सीधे execution, right? That is how the concept of operational security was introduced and maintained. Next important change is going to come under Alauddin Khilji. क्या चेंजेस देखने के लिए मिलेंगे? While Balban had mainly used his army for defense, Alauddin wanted to use it for aggressive purposes, right? So the military served a new purpose under Alauddin. It was the main instrument of his imperialism and despotism. It was the main instrument of his imperialism and despotism. Next point. Alauddin also introduced a number of military reforms, including A B C D करके लिख लो. A, introduction of cash salaries. Introduction of cash salaries for soldiers. B, the introduction of the decimal pattern of command. Decimal pattern of command. क्या होता है decimal patterns of command? The various fighting units are organized in units of 10. ठीक है? And the ranks of the officers were as follows: Khan, Malik, Amir, Sipah Salar, and the Sharkhil. Khan was the highest rank within the military, and the officer with the title Khan commanded 10,000 soldiers. Next highest, Malik, in charge of 1,000 soldiers. इसके बाद Amir, in charge of 100 soldiers. Sipah Salar, commanding a company of 10 soldiers, and Sharkhil was the individual foot soldier. By a factor of 10, the size of the unit is going to keep increasing. ठीक है? ये लिखो. He also introduced the practice of Dag and Chehra, also known as Hulia. क्या होता था दाग? दाग किसके ऊपर लगाया जाता है? दाग इज अ ब्रांड, हॉर्स को ब्रांड किया जाता था, राइट? तो दाग वाज द प्रैक्टिस ऑफ ब्रांडिंग हॉर्सेस, एंड चेहरा और हुलिया was maintaining a record of the facial features of each soldier on the muster roll. तो उसकी आइडेंटिटी का एक फिजिकल डिस्क्रिप्शन मेंटेन किया जाता था. What was the purpose? High level of military readiness and quality of soldiers and horses maintain करने के लिए. तो गुड क्वालिटी ऑफ हॉर्सेस को ही वो ब्रांड दिया जाएगा. तो इफ एनी हॉर्स इज ब्रॉट विच इज नॉट अप टू द मार्क, या फिर घोड़े की जगह गधा वगैरह कोई ले आया है, तो उसको एंटर नहीं करने दिया जाएगा. दे वुड बी टोल्ड टू गो एंड ब्रिंग द करेक्ट हॉर्स. अगर नहीं ला पा रहे हैं तो पनिशमेंट मिलेगा, राइट? चेहरा हुलिया का उसका क्या इंपॉर्टेंस होगा? That well-trained soldiers who have been paid by the state has painstakingly prepared them for war, और जंग के समय खुद ना जाकर के अपने गुलाम को भेज दे रहे हैं, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, राइट? So they are the ones who are going to serve. So it was, these were all quality control measures. और डी लिख लो, सरप्राइज inspections, surprise inspections and parades were undertaken to maintain a high level of military readiness. Maintain a high level of military readiness. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो, फिरोज शाह तुगलक. फिरोज शाह तुगलक, write down. He removed all the reforms. He removed all the reforms introduced by Alauddin. Introduced by Alauddin. Including cash salaries, ये खत्म कर दिया. Once again soldiers began to be paid in the form of iktas, and these iktas became permanent and hereditary in nature. He also removed the requirement for dag and हुलिया, ये भी खत्म कर दिया. Surprise inspections were abandoned, and corruption was encouraged. So why would any sultan encourage corruption within the military? To secure the goodwill of the soldiers and commanders. ठीक है? So there is a famous incident that once the sultan was on a tour and he visited a military camp. A military camp में कुछ equipment का inspection हो रहा था, and the official who was conducting the inspection was corrupt. तो हर एक सोल्जर से एक सिक्का ले रहा था, एंड चाहे जिस तरह जो भी स्टेट में हो उसको इक्विपमेंट, ही वाज गिविंग दी अप्रूवल. तो एक सोल्जर इधर से उधर भाग रहा था, उसका पर्स खो गया था, तो ही डिड नॉट हैव एनी कॉइंस टू गिव टू दी करप्ट ऑफिशियल. सुल्तान ने उसको देखा, उसको बुलाया अपने पास एंड खुद अपनी जेब से एक सिक्का निकाल के दिया, गो एंड ब्राइब द ऑफिशियल. दैट इज हाउ फिरोज शाह तुगलक viewed the military. That is how corruption was encouraged within the military. ठीक है, तो फिरोज शाह तुगलक के पीरियड में हमें ये देखने के लिए मिलता है. Apart from these administrative and structural changes, some material changes were also visible. Now the Turks introduced new military doctrine and also new technology. Write down. Apart from these changes, the Turks also introduced new military doctrine and new technology. लिखो. During the Rajput period, subpoint, during the Rajput period, there was an overemphasis on the elephant force. Overemphasis on the elephant force. Full stop. However, elephants were inferior to horses in terms of swiftness and maneuverability. Swiftness and maneuverability. ठीक है. Therefore, the Turks gave primacy to the cavalry over elephants. Right? Next point. Next sub point है new military tactics such as ambush attacks, comma, maintaining a reserve force and feigning weakness, F-E-I-G-N-I-N-G, and feigning weakness to draw out the enemy, became common. To draw out the enemy became common. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट, एम्बुश अटैक, छुप के हमला करना. बट these were all step nomadic horse rider tactics, तो वहां से कंटिन्यू कर रहे थे. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो, न्यू वेपन्स एंड इक्विपमेंट, न्यू वेपन्स एंड इक्विपमेंट were also introduced, including the compound Turkish bow called Navak, compound Turkish bow called Navak, which replaced the traditional Indian longbow, the traditional Indian longbow. So what was the advantage of this kind of bow? It was smaller, lighter and yet quite powerful. Although it was not as powerful as the traditional Indian longbow, लेकिन इसकी lightness और small size की वजह से horse riders could carry it and shoot it quite accurately and with ease from horseback even while riding. So write down. हाँ same में. As a result, comma, mounted archery became possible in India for the first time. Mounted archery became possible in India for the first time. ठीक है, अगला पॉइंट लिखो, नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट. Further, the effectiveness of the cavalry was also improved with the introduction of the further improved with the introduction of the iron horseshoe and iron stirrup. Iron horseshoe and iron stirrup. हॉर्सशू तो पता होगा, घोड़े की नाल जो होती है, राइट, उसको लगाने का फायदा क्या है? जूता पहन के दौड़ते हो और नंगे पैर दौड़ते हो तो क्या फर्क पड़ता है? स्पीड ज्यादा तेज किसमें होती है? जूता पहन के. घोड़े का भी सेम है, राइट. किस तरह की टेरेन को नेविगेट कर सकते हो? रफर टेरेन को इफ यू आर वेयरिंग शूज. सेम इज विद द हॉर्स. राइट डाउन. ड्यू टू द आयरन horseshoe, horses were able to run faster over rougher terrain, carrying heavier loads. Run faster over rougher terrain, carrying heavier loads. और आयरन स्टिरअप क्या होता है? सैडल के साइड में आप लोगों ने देखा होगा कि पैर टिकाने के लिए दो ऐसे डी शेप के इंप्लीमेंट्स होते हैं, दैट इज नोन एज दी स्टिरअप. इसके पहले भी इंडिया में स्टिरअप होता था, बट दैट वाज रोप स्टिरअप, आयरन स्टिरअप नहीं होता था. आयरन स्टिरअप, हाउ इज इट बेटर देन रोप स्टिरअप? ज्यादा ड्यूरेबल है, ज्यादा स्टेबल है. ठीक है, राइट डाउन. द आयरन स्टिरअप was more durable than the rope stirrup, rope ROPE, रस्सी का पहले बनता था rope stirrup, and afforded superior stability to the rider, full stop. As a result, same point me, as a result, mounted archers could even stand to fire bows while moving at a fast pace. ठीक है, so ये हो गया military change. Now a couple of questions. Discuss the political and military changes introduced by the Turks in India, full stop. To what extent were these changes revolutionary? To what extent were these changes revolutionary? Word limit is 200. First portion तो I am sure you will be able to address, हो जाएगा. Second portion, to what extent were these changes revolutionary? अब बताओ, अगर हम इसको revolutionary consider कर रहे हैं या फिर कुछ arguments दे रहे हैं for and against, तो could that be given in vacuum या फिर do you need to have awareness of what came before this? इसके पहले आया था, उसी के कंपैरिजन में, उसी की लाइट में आपको बताना पड़ेगा. So you will have to create a contrast between the political and military realities of the Rajput period and the Turkish period, and on the basis of this comparison फिर उसके बाद आप conclude कर सकते हो whether these were actually revolutionary or not. तो क्या क्या हम डिस्कस कर सकते हैं? राजपूत, हाँ, सेंट्रलाइजेशन, उसके बारे में बात कर सकते हैं. फ्यूडलिज्म, इसके बारे में बात कर सकते हैं. पोर्टफोलियो सिस्टम, इसके बारे में बात कर सकते हैं. प्रोविंशियल एंड सब प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, इसके बारे में बात कर सकते हैं. We can talk about military administration and strategy, right? तो कैन वी से कि मेजर चेंजेस विजिबल थे या नहीं थे? Changes were definitely visible, but were these changes radical enough to be categorized as revolutionary? अब देखो, राजपूत पीरियड का जो फ्यूडलिज्म है, डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन, फ्रैगमेंटेशन, सोशल सिस्टम था, दैट वाज लीडिंग टू पॉलिटिकल केओस एंड इम्परमानेंस. कई सारे चेंजेस इंट्रोड्यूस किए टर्क्स ने, बट दे कुड नेवर गेट रिड ऑफ दैट इम्परमानेंस. ठीक है, चेंजेस वर विजिबल, बट दीज वर ऑफन अबोर्टिव. The Sultanate institutions lacked permanence. And towards the end of the Sultanate period, the prevailing situation resembled very much the situation as it existed during the Rajput period. Once again, feudalism had re-emerged. Once again, the centralized authority of the Sultan had become quite weak. Once again, centrifugal forces had become dominant. There was a great degree of infighting, ethnic divisions within the Sultanate. Therefore, there was, you can say, a regressive trend that was built into the administrative and military structure, which could never be completely overcome, and resulted in a permanent weakness, permanent stresses within the empire. So while the changes were significant, it would be short-sighted and inaccurate to refer to these changes as revolutionary. Clear? वर्ड लिमिट तो रफली हाफ एंड हाफ आपको करना पड़ेगा यहाँ पर, राइट? क्योंकि पहले वाला डिस्कस करने के लिए भी आपको थोड़ा स्पेस चाहिए, और अगर इसको आप ठीक से बताते नहीं हो तो सेकंड वाले पोर्शन को आप ठीक से एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर पाओगे. तो इंस्टेड द स्ट्रैटेजी यू शुड बी फॉलोइंग ना, कि पॉलिटिकल एंड मिलिट्री सिस्टम ऑफ द टर्क्स आप उसको पहले वाले पार्ट में बता दो, फिर उसके बाद आप केवल ये बताओ that as compared to the Turkish period, Rajput period में ये चीजें थी. Therefore, the Turkish system represents a significant change, but these could not be characterized as revolutionary because of these reasons. Right? That is what we are going to do over here. Take down another question. The establishment of Turkish rule opened a new chapter in Indian history. In light of these, this statement discuss the political consequences of the establishment of Turkish rule. of this development. Once again 200 words. क्या बोल रहा है क्वेश्चन, क्या करना है यहाँ पर? भाई पॉलिटिकल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस आपको डिस्कस करने हैं सल्तनत रूल के एस्टैब्लिशमेंट के, ठीक है? तो वंस अगेन यहाँ पे देयर नीड्स टू बी सम डिग्री ऑफ कंपैरिजन, लेकिन जितना पिछले वाले क्वेश्चन में था उतना नहीं करना होगा. ओवर हियर विल बी फोकसिंग मेनली ऑन द चेंजेस which took place with the establishment of Turkish rule, namely the introduction of centralized authority, political unification at a greater scale, but the political institutions and structures remaining in a state of constant flux. ठीक है, that is what we need to discuss. चलिए, तो हमने पॉलिटिकल और मिलिट्री कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस देख लिए हैं. We are left with the economic and socio-cultural consequences that we are going to cover in our next class. Any doubts, students? Vaishnavi? No? All right, thank you.